Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now the other day we looked at the tiny $120 GTX 1050 from MSI and found that it was a pretty capable low profile graphics card. Today we're going to be comparing it to the mini GTX 1060 3GB that I reviewed and bought for my personal system a couple of months ago to see just how much performance difference there is for the extra money. At the time of this very video, both these cards are the smallest available of their respective range, with the tiny 1050 coming in at $120 or pounds, and this 1060 retailing at $185 or pounds. There is also the 1050 Ti for about $140, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So this 1050 has 2GB of GDDR5 VRAM, 640 CUDA cores and is clocked at 1354 MHz. It requires a 300W PSU and sips power with no external requirements. It could be used easily with OEM PSUs without worry. The 1060 has 3GB of GDDR5 VRAM, 1152 CUDA cores and a base clock of 1506 MHz. It requires one 6-pin connector and a 400W PSU, and is also the cheapest of the GTX 1060s, and I'm yet to run into any issues with using it. So on average this 1060 costs $65 or pounds more, so let's see what difference it makes by jumping into some games. First up it's Crysis 3 with the GTX 1060. With 1080p resolution and the high settings preset, we saw 67 frames per second on average on this level, which is a very nice result. As usual, we're using our i5 4460 and 8GB of DDR3 as well, and Crysis 3 holds up pretty well here. There isn't any significant stutter or frame loss and the game feels very responsive throughout. Over on our GTX 1050, using the same PC of course and just switching out the GPUs, we saw an average frame rate of 53 with the same resolution and settings. To be honest, this was closer than I thought and the tiny 1050 did very well. I have to say there was some noticeable stutter in this case, and for a more constant experience, medium settings would have been better, but I'm still very happy with how this card handled the game. Cry Primal next with our 1060 first, again at 1080p and the highest settings preset. We chose to try out the game at night time on this occasion, and despite not being able to see what I was doing most of the time, one thing I did notice was the frames per second average, which again was uninterrupted thanks to the lack of stutter or hiccups, providing a very playable experience. The turn of the 1050 now, and again the game ran pretty much perfectly. When you think this card is the same price that the 750 Ti was when it launched, to me it makes it sound more impressive because it highlights just how far budget graphics cards are coming along. Next up we tried Minecraft, and here is where things took an interesting turn. With our GTX 1060 at 1080p and the highest in-game settings, we saw an average return of 90 frames per second over a half-hour gameplay period. The game ran perfectly as expected, but when it came to testing our 1050, we actually saw an increase to 95 FPS. I tested both cards with the same world and tried to stay around the same area for the half-hour tests, and the results were pretty clear. The 1050 did better. I think Minecraft relies heavily on the CPU rather than GPU though, so that may be why we saw that change. Finally, it's Skyrim Remastered or Special Edition. The difference here was the biggest we saw, but it was back in the 1060's favour. With 1080p and the Ultra preset, 90 FPS was the average, after fighting some wolves and then taking a gentle stroll to Riverwood. This version actually performs better than the original in some respects, and looks a little bit better too. There was no slowdown or lag, and with our GTX 1050, we actually saw our frame rate cut in half to 45. This was quite strange as our other results were a lot closer, but I was still quite happy with the performance, and 45 FPS with Ultra settings is still very respectable in my book. But let me mention the 1050 Ti, which is also available in low profile from MSI and looks exactly the same as this 1050. I was able to borrow one very briefly to run the same tests with the same games, and as you can see by the on-screen averages, the results sit between the two other cards, which is sort of expected. you can generally expect a 15% increase in performance over the 2GB 1050, and the 4GB Ti is a fantastic choice, but I left it to the end because the low profile 1050 Ti, or even the standard size one, has in some cases been matched in price by AMD's RX 470, which would be the better buy if you don't need a small form factor GPU. In terms of this video though, and the two small cards featured today, the 1060 was the obvious winner, but the 1050 still puts up one hell of a fight. I decided to compare these two as they were just lying around. The 1060 was in my system, and the 1050 will be being put to good use at some point, so I thought why not compare the two, and I hope it's made for an interesting video. So if you enjoyed it, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and as always I hope to see all of you in the next video.